The morning they buried Wei Din, the sky over Manhattan turned the color of a wound. Win Din stood at the edge of the cemetery plot in a black dress that cost more than most people earned in a month, her hands folded in front of her, like a woman who had rehearsed grief so many times she no longer remembered what the real thing felt like. The hem of the dress caught the wind and flared against her calves, and she did not move to press it down. She did not move at all. She had learned that stillness was a language. Her father had taught her that. Be the eye of the storm, little bird. Let everyone else spin. He was gone now, and she was the eye of nothing. Around her stood 47 people. She had counted them the way she counted everything, automatically, compulsively, a habit born from years of sitting in boardrooms and auction houses, where knowing the exact number of people in a room meant knowing the exact number of threats. Business associates, port managers, 3 men from the triads who had flown in from San Francisco wearing the kind of suits that whispered money without screaming it. Her uncle, Bao Din, stood just to her left, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something chemical, something that reminded her of hospitals. He kept touching her shoulder in small, consoling pulses, like a man taking a pulse rather than offering comfort. She was 26 years old, and she had just become the most dangerous kind of vulnerable. Rich, powerful by inheritance, and entirely alone. The priest finished his Latin. The coffin descended. Wen Din did not cry. She would not let them see her cry, not here, not in front of the wolves who had already begun circling before her father's body had finished cooling. The morning after the funeral, she sat in the dining room of the family penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building her father had owned outright, eating nothing, staring at the Manhattan skyline like she was memorizing it. Her father's lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Gerald Chu, sat across from her with a folder he kept opening and closing without reading from. He had been doing it for 20 minutes. "Say it," she said without looking at him. He cleared his throat. "Miss Din, the situation with the port contracts it's complicated." "It's not complicated. Someone wants them." She finally looked at him. "Who?" Gerald Chu pressed his lips together. His eyes flicked to Bao Din, who had appeared in the doorway wearing houseclothes, a cup of tea in his hand, looking perfectly relaxed for a man whose brother had been shot twice in the back of the head in a parking garage 3 days ago. "There have been overtures," Gerald said carefully, "from the Falcone family." The name landed in the room like a dropped knife. Everyone in New York knew the Falcone name, the way they knew the names of weather systems, not as something you discussed casually, but as something you tracked, respected, feared. Leo Falcone, head of the Cosa Nostra's East Coast operation since he was 32, when he had taken his father's seat at the table with a single act of violence so clean and so complete that no one had challenged him in the 4 years since. He controlled construction, waste disposal, a network of restaurants and import businesses, and, most relevantly, he had been circling the East Coast port operations for 3 years like a patient, cold-eyed predator who understood that the best predators did not chase. They waited. Her father had resisted him. Her father had been shot in a parking garage. "What kind of overtures?" she asked. Gerald Chu opened the folder again. This time he read from it. By the time he finished, Wen Din had heard the word marriage used twice in a legal document for the first time in her life. She first saw Leo Falcone in person 6 days later. He came to her. That was the first thing she noted. Not a summons to some neutral location, not a meeting at a restaurant or a hotel conference room. He came to the penthouse. He came to her space, her territory, which meant either that he was confident enough not to need the psychological advantage of home ground, or that he wanted her to feel the particular kind of violation that came from having a predator inside your den. She thought it was probably both. He arrived at 7 in the evening with 2 men who waited outside the elevator and said nothing. She met him in the living room, standing, because she had decided she would not be sitting when he entered. Small choices. Her father had taught her those too. Every room you walk into is a negotiation, Win. The furniture is the language. Leo Falcone was taller than she expected. The photographs she had found did not capture the particular quality of stillness he carried. A stillness so complete it was almost animal. The kind that came not from calm, but from absolute, practiced control. He was 36 years old and looked exactly like a man who had built himself into a weapon and maintained that weapon with meticulous daily discipline. Dark hair, a jaw like a piece of architecture, eyes the precise colour of storm clouds over the Atlantic, grey with something colder underneath, something that was the colour of old iron or new ice. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $10,000, and he wore it the way working men wore work clothes, like it was simply the appropriate garment for the function he was performing. No tie. The top button of his white shirt was undone, and for some reason that small, specific detail was more unsettling than if he had walked in carrying a weapon. He looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "You have your father's eyes," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with just the faintest trace of the Italian-American accent that had softened but not disappeared over decades of Manhattan. He had good eyes. "Did you know him well?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Well enough." He moved to the window without being invited to, looking out at the skyline the way a man looks at something he already owns. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Are you?" He turned from the window and looked at her with an expression she would spend weeks trying to name. It was not irritation, it was not amusement, it was something more precise than either, something that felt like recognition. Like she had said something he had been waiting to hear. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." She did not believe him, but she noted that he did not flinch from the implication in her question, and that told her something about the kind of man she was dealing with. They sat. They talked for 2 hours. Gerald Chew was present and said almost nothing. By the end of the evening, the terms of the arrangement had been laid out with the same dispassionate precision that Leo Falcone seemed to apply to everything. The marriage would be real, legally binding, witnessed, and publicly acknowledged. She would move into his primary residence outside the city. The port contracts would transfer into a jointly held corporation under both their names. She would have access to resources, security, and whatever comforts she required. She would not be treated poorly. He said that last part looking directly at her, and she understood it was the closest thing to a promise a man like him was capable of making. "And if I refuse?" she said. Leo Falcone picked up his glass of water. He had not touched the scotch she'd offered, and set it back down with a small, definitive click. "The ports will be taken anyway," he said. "The only question is whether you benefit from the transaction or simply lose it." She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Neither of them blinked. "I want my own legal counsel present at every document signing," she said.
Of course.
"I want freedom of movement within reasonable security parameters." "Reasonable is a flexible word," he said, "but yes." "And I want answers," she held his gaze, "about my father." Something moved behind his eyes, something so fast and so carefully controlled that she almost missed it. Almost. "In time," he said, "you'll have answers about everything." She didn't know then what he meant. She married him 3 weeks later, in a ceremony with 12 witnesses, in a private room at a restaurant in Midtown that the Falcone family had owned for 40 years. She wore ivory, he wore black. There were no flowers. When the officiant pronounced them married, and Leo Falcone turned to look at her, she searched his face for something: satisfaction, triumph, the cold gloating of a man who had gotten what he wanted, and found none of those things. What she found instead was something that frightened her far more. He looked at her like she was the only real thing in the room. The house was not what she expected. She had expected something garish, something that announced wealth the way men who came from nothing announced it, loudly, with excess, with a kind of hunger that left fingerprints on every surface. She had expected marble that was too white, art that was too large, rooms that echoed because they were designed to impress rather than to inhabit. What she found instead was a mansion that had been built in 1887 by a shipping magnate who had died broke, and whose ghost, according to the housekeeper, Mrs. Caravella, still walked the east wing on nights when the wind came up from the Sound. The house sat on 40 acres of private land in Westchester County, 22 miles from Midtown Manhattan, surrounded by hardwood forest that was turning red and amber and rust with the deep October settling into its bones. The driveway was 3/4 of a mile long and lined with oaks that had been planted before either of them had been born. The house itself was built in dark stone, 3 stories, with tall windows that faced south and west and caught the afternoon light in a way that made the interior glow in shades of amber and copper at certain hours. There were 14 rooms that Ween counted in the first week, not including the staff quarters, the security wing, or the basement level that she was informed, politely but unmistakably, was off-limits. "What's in the basement?" she asked Mrs. Caravella on her 3rd day. Mrs. Caravella was a woman in her late 60s who had been with the Falcone household for 22 years and who had the particular combination of warmth and absolute discretion that distinguished great household staff from mere employees. She smiled at Wynne with genuine fondness and said, "Mr. Falcone's private workspace, Mrs. Falcone. He'll show you himself when he's ready." When he's ready, as if she were a child being told she couldn't open a gift until Christmas. Leo was in the city during the week. He drove out on Friday evenings, arriving usually around 9, and left again on Monday mornings before 6. She knew his schedule, not because he had shared it with her, but because she had paid attention, which was what she did with everything that constituted a variable in her environment. She catalogued his habits the way a general catalogues enemy movements, not with hostility necessarily, but with the understanding that information was the only armour available to her in a situation where every other form of defence had been stripped away. The stripped-away feeling was the hardest part. She had grown up in rooms where her opinion was sought, where her intelligence was considered an asset, where she sat at tables rather than being arranged on them like a decorative object. Her father had educated her fiercely, had taken her to negotiations from the time she was 14, had treated her mind as his greatest inheritance to her, rather than her face or her name, or the connections she could make through marriage. And now here she was, married, contained, watched. She had a driver, which meant she had a warden. She had a phone that she was reasonably certain was monitored. She had the run of the house and the grounds, and both were beautiful, and both felt like the most elegant cage ever constructed. On Friday evenings, she would hear his car on the driveway from wherever she was in the house. She had learned to recognize the particular sound of the black Mercedes, different from the security team's vehicles, and something in her would sharpen and contract simultaneously, like a muscle preparing for impact. The first Friday, he had come to find her in the library, where she had been working through a box of her father's business documents that she had insisted on bringing with her. He stood in the doorway for a moment, loosening his tie, looking at the spread of papers on the table with an expression she couldn't read. "You should eat," he said. "Mrs. Caravella made something." "I'm not hungry." "You weren't hungry yesterday either, according to her." She looked up at him. "You're tracking my meals." "I'm tracking whether my wife is eating." He said the word wife without any perceptible weight on it, as if it were simply an accurate descriptor rather than a loaded one. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He crossed the room and sat down across from her, which surprised her. She had expected him to make his point and leave. Instead, he looked at the documents on the table, then looked at her and said, "What are you looking for?" She held his gaze. "Answers, like I said." A pause. He was wearing his control like a second skin tonight, but she had been watching him closely enough to notice that it was not effortless. There was a quality of maintenance to it, like a very still surface that is still because something underneath is working constantly to keep it that way. "Your father was a careful man," Leo said. "He was killed by someone who knew his schedule," she said. "Which means someone close to him." Leo said nothing. "Did you know his schedule?" she asked. He looked at her for a long, slow moment. "I knew a great many things about your father, Wien." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal prefix, and she registered it without reacting to it. "Most of them I respected. Some of them worried me." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it's not." He stood. "Come eat. You need your strength for what's coming." "What's coming?" He paused in the doorway. In the lamplight, he was a study in shadows and sharp angles, and for a moment she thought she understood how he had walked into that seat of power at 32, not through charm or inherited loyalty alone, but through the particular quality of presence that made people believe, without knowing why, that this was a man you did not cross. "The other families will want to meet you," he said. "There are dinners, events. You'll need to be prepared." "I'm always prepared." He almost smiled. She saw it at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of it, quickly controlled. "I know," he said. "That's why I married you." He left. She sat with that sentence for a long time, turning it over, examining it for the threat in it, because that was how she had learned to receive every compliment from powerful men, as something with a hidden edge. But the more she turned it over, the more it sounded impossibly like something close to genuine. She met Dante Falcone, Leo's younger brother, on the second weekend. Dante was 31, Dark where Leo was dark, but without the stillness. He moved through rooms like weather, all energy and charm and teeth that showed when he smiled. He had Leo's jaw and none of Leo's reserve. And he showed up Saturday morning in a car that was too expensive and too red, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, and threw his arms around Leo in the entry hall in a way that momentarily cracked something in Leo's composure. Then he turned and looked at Wynne with undisguised curiosity, and she looked back. "So you're the one," Dante said. "The one what?" she asked. He grinned. "The one who's going to make my brother human." He looked at Leo. "She's terrifying," he said, as if this were a compliment. "She's standing right here," Wynne said. "God, I like her," Dante said to Leo. Leo said nothing, but she thought she saw the ghost of that almost smile again. Dante stayed for lunch and filled the silence that existed between Leo and Wynne with a kind of cheerful, relentless energy that she found herself grateful for in a way she hadn't expected. He told stories, some of them funny, some of them almost certainly edited for a civilian audience, all of them told with the theatrical timing of a man who had spent his whole life being the person who made the room comfortable. He watched her and Leo with the sharp, assessing eyes of someone who loved his brother and was conducting a very thorough evaluation of the woman now in his orbit. When Leo stepped out to take a call, Dante leaned forward across the lunch table and looked at her with a directness that cut through all the social padding. "He's not what you think he is," he said quietly. "What do I think he is?" she asked. Dante considered her. Cold. Calculating. Someone who engineered your situation for personal gain. And he's not? He engineered your situation, Dante said, but the why? That's more complicated. He sat back as they heard Leo's footsteps returning. "Just give it time," he said softly. "He's terrible at being a person, but he's very good at being honest, eventually. Pay attention to what he does, not what he says." Leo came back into the room, and Dante immediately switched registers, back to cheerful and surface level, and the moment closed like water over a stone. But Wynne turned Dante's words over all through the rest of that afternoon, and she was still turning them over when the lights in the house went dark, and she lay in the enormous bed in the room that was hers alone. Leo had given her her own room, which was either respectful or strategic, she had not yet decided, listening to the October wind moving through the oaks outside, and wondering what kind of game she had agreed to play, and whether the rules were anything like what she thought they were. The Montello dinner was the first. It was held on the third Saturday of Wynne's residence in the Westchester house, and Leo had briefed her on it with a thoroughness she found both impressive and slightly insulting, as if she needed to be taught how to sit at a table. He had told her the names of the 6 men and their wives who would attend. Carlo Montello, 64, construction empire built over 50 years of very careful corruption. His wife, Gianna, who collected Flemish masters and pretended not to know what her husband did. Marco Ricci, 47, waste management and port-adjacent real estate, and so on through 4 other couples who made up the inner constellation of the Falcone family's social world. "They'll be assessing you," Leo said. They were in the kitchen the morning of the dinner, him at the island with an espresso, her with green tea, and she had been listening to his briefing with half her attention and spending the other half observing the way he moved through his own house, economical, purposeful, never idle, and yet somehow always slightly separate from the environment around him, as if belonging fully to any space was something he did not permit himself. "I know they will," she said. "What's the message you want them to receive?" He paused, with the espresso cup halfway to his mouth, looked at her. "What?" "The message. About this marriage. About me. About what I represent." She set her cup down. "We're going to walk into that room, and every person in it is going to be reading us for information. What story are we telling?" Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, controlled, but she caught it. Reassessment. As if she had said something that rearranged a variable in his calculations. "Tell me what story you think we should tell," he said. It was the first time he had asked for her input. She recognized it for what it was. A test, yes, but also something more genuine than a test. She thought for a moment. "That this marriage is strategic and successful," she said. "That I am not a hostage and not a grief-stricken girl who was maneuvered. That I came to this table with my own power, and I remain at this table by choice. That you gained an alliance, not a possession." Leo was quiet for a long moment. "That's a more sophisticated message than most people in that room will be capable of receiving," he said. "Then we're planting seeds," she said. "Some of them will get it eventually." He looked at her with that particular quality of attention that she was beginning to recognize, the kind that felt less like being watched and more like being read carefully by someone who took the text very seriously. "The dress," he said. "Don't wear black." "I wasn't going to." "Red would be too aggressive." "I know. I was thinking dark emerald." Another of those fractional pauses. "Yes," he said. "That's right." She turned away to refill her tea, and she did not let him see that his approval, the small, precise rightness of it, had done something to her equilibrium that she was not prepared for. The Montello dinner was held at a restaurant in the private back room of an Italian place in the West 70s that had been a Falcone property since the 1970s, and that smelled of red wine and roasted garlic and 50 years of conversations that never left the room. The table was round, which she noted, no head of table, no visual hierarchy. Smart. Leo's choice, she suspected. She wore the dark emerald. She wore her mother's jade earrings, small and understated. She wore her face like her father had taught her. Open just enough to invite engagement, closed just enough to protect the thing inside. Leo met her at the car. He was in a black suit with a white shirt and a dark tie, and when he looked at her, something happened in his eyes that was very fast and very thoroughly locked down. He offered her his arm in a gesture so natural and practiced that it took her a moment to realize that his hand, where it covered hers in the crook of his elbow, was applying the faintest pressure, not possessive exactly, steadying. "Ready?" he said. "Always," she said. They walked in together, and she felt the room shift on its axis to accommodate them. She watched it happen the way her father had taught her to watch rooms, not by looking directly at people, but by tracking the peripheral movements, the micro-adjustments of posture, the conversations that paused and restarted at a different pitch. Carlo Montello rose first, arms wide, with the particular enthusiasm of a man who is expressing warmth as a form of assessment. "Leo, come stai?" Carlo said, gripping Leo's hand and then looking at Uyen with frank, appraising eyes that she met directly. "And this must be the beautiful Mrs. Falcone. The papers don't do you justice, my dear." "They rarely do," she said pleasantly. "You must be Carlo. I understand you built the Meridian Tower. My father had a great deal of respect for that project. The foundation engineering was remarkable." Carlo blinked. Then he smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Your father had good taste," he said. "Leo, she knows construction." "She knows everything," Leo said, without apparent irony, and she felt the warmth of those words on her skin, like something she hadn't known she was cold from. The dinner proceeded. She was brilliant at it, not flashy, not performative, but quietly, precisely brilliant in the way her father had trained her to be, sliding into each conversation with a detail that demonstrated knowledge and a question that demonstrated respect. The wives warmed to her faster than the men, which she had calculated for. By the second course, she had Gianna Montello leaning toward her, talking about a Flemish painter they had both seen at the Met last spring. And by the third course, she had Marco Ricci asking her opinion on the new dock expansion proposals in Baltimore. Leo said very little throughout the dinner, but she was aware of him constantly. He sat to her right, and she could feel the quality of his attention like a change in air pressure, steady and specific, focused not on the table, but on her. On the way she moved, the way she held her fork, the way she laughed at something Gianna said, a genuine laugh that she hadn't planned, and the way his hand moved, once, briefly, to the back of her chair when he shifted in his seat, close enough that his fingers barely grazed her shoulder blade. She did not react to it, but something in her registered it like a tuning fork struck against bone. After dinner, in the car on the way back to Westchester, they sat in comfortable and then complicated silence as the city fell away behind them, and the dark of the Hutchinson River Parkway replaced it, the headlights of the security vehicles ahead and behind, like the lights of an escort on water. "Carlo will call me Monday," Leo said eventually. "What will he say?" "That you're the best thing that's happened to this family in years." A pause. "He'll be right." She turned and looked at him in the dark of the car, his profile, the angle of his jaw, the way the passing streetlights caught the edge of his cheekbone. "Was that a compliment?" she asked. "It was a fact," he said. She turned back to the window. Outside, the trees rushed past, black against the lighter black of the sky, and she thought about facts and compliments and the indeterminate territory where one became the other. November arrived with the particular cruelty of a season that refuses to fully commit. Cold in the mornings, deceptive in the afternoons, and then brutally cold again at night, as if the weather itself was practicing a form of psychological pressure. Uyen found herself spending more time in the library, surrounded by the particular smell of old paper and lamp oil that the house seemed to exhale from its walls, working through her father's documents with the systematic focus of someone searching for a needle in a haystack, while trying not to let the people watching her notice that she was looking for a needle. She had found several things already. Anomalies in the port contracts, specific access permissions that had been renegotiated in the 6 months before her father's death, financial movements that she could not account for with any legitimate business logic, a name that appeared twice in marginalia in her father's own handwriting, in the Chinese he had always used for private notes. Bu Xinran. Not trusted, next to an initial that could have been a B or a D. B or D. She turned the possibilities over like stones. Leo arrived Friday evening to find her at the library table as usual, and this time he did not suggest dinner immediately. He came into the room, took off his jacket, draped it over the back of a chair with the automatic precision of a man performing a familiar ritual, and sat down across from her. He looked at the documents spread between them. He looked at her. "What did you find?" he said. She looked up. "What makes you think I found something?" "Because you're very good at hiding things," he said, "and tonight you're only hiding it at about 60% effort, which means either you're tired or you want me to notice." The accuracy of this was briefly infuriating. She set down the paper she was holding. "There were access changes to the Port Newark operation," she said, "6 months before my father died. Someone renegotiated the security protocols for the South Pier. The change appears in a secondary contract addendum that was not in the main file. I found it in a folder labeled Miscellaneous." Leo was very still. "Someone with inside knowledge of how your father organized his documents," he said, almost to himself. "Someone who knew that miscellaneous meant it wouldn't be read." "Someone close to him," she said. "Yes." Leo's eyes came up to hers. They held something she hadn't seen in them before. Not quite urgency, but something adjacent to it. Something that was pressing against the surface of his control from the inside. "How close?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Family close." The silence in the library was the kind that had weight. Outside, wind moved through the oak branches, and the sound of it was like breathing, in and out, the house breathing around them. "Wien." He said her name like it cost him something. "There are things I'm working on that I cannot tell you yet. Not because I'm hiding them from you, because the moment you know them, you become a target for the person responsible, and I am not prepared to have you in that position without a complete security solution in place." She stared at him. "My father is dead," she said. "I am already in that position." "No," he said, with a precision that cut through every instinct she had to dismiss him. "You're adjacent to it. There's a difference, and I need that difference to remain intact while I work." "You know something." Not a question. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she understood the quiet as its own answer. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you known something?" "Long enough that I should have acted sooner," he said, "and not long enough that I could have stopped what happened to your father. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and I have lived with both of them since the morning his body was found." He said this with the flat, precise tone of a man reporting facts rather than feelings, but underneath the precision she heard something that was not flat at all, something worn and aching and very, very old. She sat back in her chair. She was looking at him differently than she had been looking at him before, searching for something new, some recalibration of the map she had been building. "Tell me one thing," she said, "one true thing right now." He met her eyes. In the lamplight his face was all shadows and angles, and the grey of his eyes was the colour of deep water at dusk. "Your father trusted the wrong person," he said, "and I have been trying to find proof of exactly who that person is since before we were married. That's true." She believed him. That was the thing she did not expect, sitting in that library at 10 o'clock on a Friday night in November. She believed him. Not completely, not with the open-handed trust of someone who had not been burned, but with the careful, calibrated belief of a person whose instrument was well-tuned and who was getting a clear reading. It frightened her more than not believing him would have. "Tell me when you have the proof," she said. "Yes," he said. Just that. He stayed at the table for another hour, not talking, both of them reading separately, him going through what appeared to be financial reports, and her working through her father's documents, with the awareness of him 3 feet away, like a second heartbeat in the room. Mrs. Caravella brought tea at 11 without being asked, and set it between them without comment, and Wynne wrapped both hands around the cup and allowed herself, just for a moment, to not calculate anything at all. It was the most comfortable she had been since her father died. The realization settled into her chest like something very warm landing in a very cold place, and she examined it with the same careful attention she gave everything. And then she set it gently aside and picked up the next document. The nightclub was Dante's domain and his alibi. It was called Nero, Leo's doing, Dante had told her. He had named it after a Roman emperor as a joke that only the 2 brothers found funny, and it occupied the top 2 floors of a building on West 26th that the family had converted in the early 2000s. It was, by reputation, the best nightclub in Chelsea. Music that justified its price, a guest list maintained with theological seriousness, and a VIP level that most of Manhattan spent their careers trying to access. Wen had been there twice now, both times for what were ostensibly social events, but were, in reality, business meetings, conducted in the language of leisure, which was the Falcone family's preferred dialect for any conversation they didn't want overheard. She had watched Leo move through the nightclub's upper level with the detached precision of a man conducting an inspection, and the surface ease of a man enjoying himself. The 2 things layered over each other so thoroughly that only someone paying very close attention could see the scene between them. She was always paying very close attention. On the second visit, she had been standing at the bar on the upper level when Leo appeared at her shoulder. He had a talent for appearing without warning, soundless despite his size, and said, close to her ear because the music below was seeping up through the floor, "Richie's contact from Baltimore is here. Table 14. Don't look directly." She had looked at table 14 via the mirror behind the bar, casually, while asking the bartender for sparkling water. She'd processed the face. 50-something, grey at the temples, the particular kind of tan that came from boats rather than beaches. "Port Authority board member?" she'd said quietly. She'd felt, rather than seen, the way Leo stilled behind her. "How did you know?" "He has a harbour master's watch, authentic one, not decorative. And he's talking to Ricci like a man who wants something, but has something to offer first." She accepted her water. "What does he want?" A pause, then, still close to her ear, "A cut of the new terminal access. Ricci's been managing him for 3 months." "So manage him directly," she said. "Cut out the intermediary. Ricci's commission will be the terminal's operating margin, and you both know it." She turned slightly, just enough to look at Leo's profile. "Unless Ricci's corporation on the other thing is worth the cost." Leo looked at her. In the shifting coloured light of the club, his expression was something she had not seen before. Not the controlled blankness, not the ghost of the almost smile. Something more naked, more unguarded, more genuinely startled. "What other thing?" he asked. She held his eyes. "The thing you're investigating," she said. "The thing connected to my father. Ricci knows something, doesn't he? That's why you're keeping him close despite the margin." The silence between them lasted exactly 2 seconds. She counted. "Yes," Leo said. "Then keep him comfortable," she said, "but watch his access. Whatever he knows, someone knows that he knows it." She turned back to the bar. "The harbour master is looking our way. Smile at me." "What?" "Smile at me. We're newlyweds at a nightclub. It's the most natural thing in the world." She said this with perfect composure, facing away from him, speaking into her sparkling water. Leo Falcone put his hand on her waist and smiled at her, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him. Not the ghost of one, not the controlled almost of one, but a real smile, warm and slightly helpless. And it hit her in the sternum, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. She smiled back. For the camera, for the harbour master, for the room, and told herself that was the only reason. She found the room in December, not the basement. She had made her peace, provisionally, with not knowing what was in the basement. What she found was something else. A study on the second floor, behind a door she had assumed was a closet that turned out not to be locked. She discovered it on a Wednesday afternoon when the security team was conducting their weekly perimeter check. Mrs. Caravella was at her weekly grocery run, and Wien was, for the first time since her arrival, genuinely alone in the house. She had been exploring in the way she had been exploring since childhood, systematically, without particular intent, the way you map a space you're going to live in for a long time. She pressed on the door and it opened, and she stood in the doorway of a room that told her more about Leo Falcone in 30 seconds than 4 weeks of careful observation had. The room was not a study in the conventional sense. There was a desk, yes, and shelves of books that were not decorative. They were red, bent-spined, annotated, the kind of books a person uses rather than displays. But the most significant feature was the wall to the left of the door, which was covered floor to ceiling in what she recognized immediately as a working investigation board. Not photographs and string in the amateur sense, this was something more sophisticated. Printed reports, satellite images of port facilities, financial documents, organizational charts. Photographs, her father's face among others, and next to his face, connected by the careful topology of investigation, a network of names and relationships that she read with increasing velocity, her heart picking up its pace as she walked toward it. She did not touch anything. She stood 3 feet back and read. Her father. The Port Newark operation, the specific access changes she had found in the miscellaneous folder, here represented in a larger pattern she hadn't been able to see from her narrower vantage. 3 names she recognized from her father's associate network, 2 names she didn't recognize. 1 name she recognized with a physical jolt that started in her chest and radiated outward to her hands. Bao Din. Her uncle's name was on Leo's wall. It was in the middle of the chart, not at the periphery. Connected to the financial movements. Connected to the access changes. Connected to a name in red that she did not recognize, but that had 3 documents pinned beneath it. And one of the documents, visible even from 3 feet back, had the logo of a Russian outfit she had read about twice in her father's files. A logistics company called Severny Most that had been trying to penetrate East Coast port operations for 4 years. Russian. Red. Her uncle's name. She stood in that room for a very long time. The afternoon light moved across the floor in the slow, indifferent way of December light, thin and pale and entirely without warmth. When she left the room, she closed the door behind her with the same care with which she had found it. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed in the deliberate, controlled way she had taught herself for situations that threatened to break through the careful management she maintained over her interior state. Bowed in, her uncle, the man who had held her hand at the funeral, who had sat across from her in the penthouse when Gerald Chew read from the folder, and she had caught something in his expression that she'd dismissed as grief. B or D in the margins of her father's private notes. Not ambiguous at all, she understood now. Her father had known, had suspected, had written the name in Chinese so that the wrong person couldn't read it over his shoulder, and the wrong person had been close enough to his shoulder to arrange his death before he could act on what he suspected. And Leo had known, or suspected. Long enough, he had said, long enough. The question she could not answer, the question that sat in her chest like something sharp and pointed in every direction at once, was, if Leo had known about Bao's involvement, had Leo used that knowledge? Had the assassination of Wei Din been convenient for Leo Falcone? Had the grieving, vulnerable daughter and the ripe-for-takeover port operation been something Leo had cleared the way for, or something he had simply been waiting for someone else to clear? She needed to know the difference. The difference was everything. She needed, more than that, proof. Not Leo's version of proof, presented to her in his own time at his own pace, her own proof, gathered by her own means. Which meant she needed resources Leo didn't control, which meant she needed to make a call she had been resisting making for 6 weeks. His name was Ivan Sorokin, and he was Leo Falcone's most significant rival on the East Coast. He was also the man who had sent her an encrypted message through a third-party channel 3 weeks after her father's death, before the marriage, when she was still in the penthouse and still calculating her options. The message had been brief and unambiguous. Your father had allies you don't know about yet. When you're ready to know them, you know how to reach me. She had deleted it immediately. She had remembered every word. She thought of Dante Falcone's voice over lunch. Pay attention to what he does, not what he says. She thought of Leo's grey eyes in the library. There are things I'm working on that I cannot tell you yet. She thought of her father's body in a parking garage, 2 bullets in the back of his head. She picked up the burner phone she had obtained through a chain of transactions she had executed with the same quiet, patient precision she brought to everything, and she composed a single message to an encrypted number. Ready, she wrote. She sat with the phone in her hands, and she understood, with perfect clarity, that she was crossing a threshold. That once she sent this message, there was a version of this story that ended very badly for everyone involved, including her, and that the only protection against that ending was whether the thing she suspected about Leo was true. She sent the message. Outside the window, the December afternoon was dying, painting the bare oak branches in the colours of rust and old blood. The Falcone family Christmas party was the event of the season, not the social season, not the arts and philanthropy season, but the season that mattered, the one conducted in private rooms and secure locations by people who moved the actual machinery of the city. It was held, as it was every year, at the Falcone estate on Long Island, a property that made the Westchester house look like a guest house. 28 rooms, formal gardens running down to a private beach, a ballroom built in the 1920s that had hosted presidents and been the site of at least 3 significant Cosa Nostra agreements that had reshaped the eastern seaboard. Wien stood at Leo's side as they entered, wearing a dark wine-red dress she had chosen with the same strategic precision she brought to every appearance. And she smiled at the right people and said the right things and navigated the complex social architecture of the evening with the skill of someone who had grown up in rooms exactly like this. Different language, different cuisine, same fundamental game. She also kept her eyes open for everything Leo was not telling her. There were 22 families represented. She had done her research in the week before the party, building her own understanding of the network from the combination of what Leo had briefed her on, what she had observed, and what she had been quietly assembling from her own resources. The Bertoli family from Providence, the Esposito brothers from Philadelphia, and from outside the traditional Cosa Nostra structure, several men she had marked with interest. Alexei Gromov, introduced to her by Leo with careful neutrality as a business associate with shipping interests, who shook her hand and held it perhaps half a second longer than was necessary, and who had eyes the colour of wet concrete. "Shipping interests," she said to Leo quietly, after Gromov had moved on. "Is that what we call it?" "It's what he calls it," Leo said, equally quietly. "What we call it is someone we are currently in a period of managed tension with, which means tonight he is a guest, and tomorrow he remains a problem." "Is he connected to Severny Most?" she asked, testing. She wanted to see if the name got a reaction that told her whether Leo knew she had been in the study. Leo's hand, resting at the small of her back in the navigating posture he had adopted for parties, pressed very slightly firmer. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked, voice unchanged, eyes scanning the room ahead of them. "I read," she said simply. A pause. "Yes," he said, peripherally. She filed this, Gromov, Severny Most, and her uncle's name on Leo's board, all connected by the topography of the investigation she had seen. The shape of it was becoming clearer, and the shape was not reassuring. She found Dante on the terrace at 10 o'clock, smoking with the cheerful guilt of a man who quit every other month. "Those will kill you," she said. "So will approximately everything at this party," he said pleasantly. He held out the pack, and she shook her head. He put it away. "How are you doing, honestly?" She considered. "I'm beginning to understand the structure," she said. Dante looked at her sideways. "The structure of what?" "All of it. The family, the business, the situation." She paused. "Your brother." Dante was quiet for a moment, looking out at the formal garden where strings of warm white lights had been threaded through the bare-branched hedges, and in the cold December air they looked like a constellation that had descended to earth. "What do you understand about him?" Dante asked. "That he's protecting me," she said, "or trying to, without telling me he's doing it, which is both a strategic choice and a deeply frustrating personal habit." Dante laughed, a real warm laugh that puffed into the cold air as vapour. "God," he said, "you two are going to either destroy each other or be extraordinary." He turned and looked at her with his brother's directness, stripped of his brother's control. "He doesn't do this, you know. He doesn't bring people close. Since our father died, The only person he's allowed inside 15 feet of whatever the real part of him is has been me, and I've had to physically force that on a regular basis. And me? She said. Dante smiled. He watches you like a man who has just found something he thought had stopped existing. She absorbed this, let it move through her and settle somewhere she didn't look at directly. Does he ever tell you what he's working on? The investigation? Dante's expression shifted. Something careful moved into it. He tells me pieces, he said. Enough that I know it's serious, enough that I know he's been at it for over a year. He looked at her steadily. He started it before your father died, Win, before the marriage was even a concept. I need you to know that. She looked at him. Why? Because, Dante said very quietly, the version of events where Leo is the villain of this story is the version that gets you killed. He said it gently, but it landed like stone on stone. She stood on the terrace in the December cold for a long time after Dante went back inside. Below her, the garden lights shimmered. Above, the Long Island sky was cloudless and crowded with stars, and the moon was 3 days past new, barely a thread of silver, a black moon almost, present but invisible. She thought about Ivan Sorokin's message already sent. She thought about the shape of the investigation she had seen on Leo's wall. She thought about her father's Chinese notes and the initial that was not ambiguous. She thought about what it would mean if Dante was right. She stayed on the terrace until she was cold through, and then she went back inside and found Leo across the room watching her with an expression that he did not bother to control in time. And what she saw in his face before he recomposed it made the cold in her chest worse, not better. He looked afraid. Not of a threat, not of a situation. Afraid of something specific, precise, and personal. The particular fear of a man who has something real to lose and knows it. She crossed the room to his side. She smiled at the couple he was speaking to. She placed her hand on his arm in the way she had been doing for public appearances. Easy, practiced, unthinking, and felt his hand come to cover hers immediately, with a pressure she had begun to map and could not stop noticing. "Everything all right?" he murmured, for her ears only. "Yes," she said. She was lying. He might have known it. She watched his face for the tell. He gave none, but he did not let go of her hand. She met Ivan Sorokin for the first time on a Tuesday in January, in the back room of a tea house in Flushing that catered to an exclusively Chinese clientele, and was, therefore, the last place anyone monitoring a Mafia wife would think to look for her. Getting there had required 3 weeks of careful work, building a sufficient deviation from her monitored patterns to create a window, establishing the cover story, a visit to a Chinese herbal medicine practitioner she had genuinely been seeing since her arrival, and calibrating her exit from the security detail to look like a woman asserting personal privacy rather than a woman running an operation. She had, in the end, simply walked into the practitioner's office through the front and out through the back. The security team had probably noticed within 20 minutes. She was counting on having 40. Sorokin was 52 and looked like a professor of Eastern European literature, thin, thoughtful-faced, in a grey wool coat that was good quality but unpretentious. He had translucent blue eyes and the particular quality of stillness that she had learnt to associate with extremely dangerous people, though his stillness was different from Leo's. Leo's stillness was the stillness of compressed force. Sorokin's was the stillness of calculation, the stillness of a man for whom everything was always being processed, filed, and indexed. He rose when she entered. He gestured to the seat across from him. He waited until the tea was poured before he spoke. "You look like your father," he said. His English was precise and lightly accented. "He was a formidable man. I was genuinely sorry to hear of his death." "Were you?" she said, because she was her father's daughter, and she did not take condolences from strangers at face value. "Yes," Sorokin said. "We had a relationship of mutual respect and commercial coexistence that served both our interests well. His death disrupted a great deal that I had built with patience." He poured tea for both of them with a deliberate unhurriedness. "It also," he added, watching her, "removed the most significant obstacle to Falcone's port access." "Which you believe Falcone arranged," she said. "I believe," Sorokin said carefully, "that Leo Falcone had both the motive and the capability to arrange it. Whether he did so directly or benefited from someone else's action is a question I have not been able to answer definitively." He sipped his tea. "Which is, I assume, the question you are here to help me answer." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What can you give me?" she asked. "Information," he said. "And tools." "And what do you want in return?" He looked at her with those translucent blue eyes. "Access," he said simply. "When you have established your position within the Falcone structure, or after it, depending on what you discover, access to the port operation. Not control, partnership. What your father and I had." She studied him. "You had a partnership with my father. Carefully structured, mutually beneficial, and absolutely off the books." He smiled faintly. "Your father was a pragmatist. I hope you are too." She thought about Leo's wall. She thought about the red thread connecting her uncle's name to the Russian company that Sorokin was, she was now certain, connected to. She thought about the conversation she was having and what it would mean if Leo found out. She thought about her father in a parking garage, 2 bullets. "What information?" she asked. What Sorokin gave her over the course of the next 3 meetings was a picture, and it was not the picture she had expected. There was, in his files, and Sorokin was a meticulous man with meticulous files, documentation of payments moving from a shell company registered in Delaware through 3 intermediary accounts to a private security contractor based in Miami. The Miami contractor had, in his own files that Sorokin had obtained through means he did not describe, an entry for a job in New York in September, which was the month of her father's death. The job was coded, as such things always were, but the location was Port Newark, and the client was listed as a holding company with a name she had seen before. She had seen it in her father's miscellaneous folder, the folder with the secondary contract addendum, the folder that contained the access changes. She had also seen it, she went back through her memory with the same careful systematics she brought to all recall, on Leo's investigation board. On the right side, not the centre, not prominent. Possible origin point or cutout, her memory supplied, from a handwritten note she had read in the study. Sorokin gave her something else, a financial analysis suggesting that the holding company had been funded from 2 sources. One source she could not trace. The other source was a numbered account that Sorokin's analyst had traced with significant effort to a bank in Macau with historic connections to the Din family's subsidiary operations. Baudin's subsidiary operations specifically, not her father's. She sat with this information for 3 days before she understood what she was looking at. Her uncle, a Russian logistics company, a Miami contractor, her father's death, and Leo's investigation, already assembled, already pointed in the right direction, pointed at Baudin, with her uncle at the centre rather than the periphery, with a note that read, as best as she could reconstruct from memory, acting on behalf of external interest. Verify Din family internal? Verify Din family internal. He had been trying to determine whether Bao had acted on behalf of a Falcone interest or an independent one. He had been trying to determine, essentially, whether this was a family crime. He had been trying to protect her from the answer long enough to verify it completely. She sat with all of this for 3 days, and she made the worst decision of her life. She decided that the risk was too high, that she could not afford to wait for Leo's verification, that the man with the most to gain from her father's death was still Leo Falcone, and that a coincidence of investigations did not equal innocence, that she needed to act, not wait, that every day she waited was a day in which she was more compromised, more vulnerable, more dependent on a man who might be her enemy. She called Sorokin's number and she said, "I want to discuss next steps." And she began to plan. She did not expect him to notice the change. She should have known better. She was in the kitchen on a Saturday morning in January, making the congee she made when she was stressed, her grandmother's recipe, rice and ginger, and the specific patience of a dish that required 40 minutes of slow cooking and provided in return the particular comfort of muscle memory applied to grief. She had been making it since she was 9 years old. She made it when she needed to think without thinking. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway in running clothes. He ran every morning, regardless of weather, which she had catalogued and categorized under discipline as control mechanism, and stopped. He looked at her at the stove, then at the pot, then back at her. "What are you making?" he asked. "Congee." He came into the kitchen without being invited. He poured himself coffee from the machine that Mrs. Caravella had set up before leaving for the market. He leaned against the counter 3 feet from where she was standing and looked at the pot. "My mother used to make something like that," he said. "Different ingredients, same principle." She looked at him. "Your mother cooked?" "Before." He said it without elaboration, in the way he said things that had a large and complicated territory behind them that he had no intention of entering. "What's wrong?" he said. "Nothing's wrong." "You make that when something's wrong," he said, and she turned to look at him fully, because how, in the course of 6 weeks, had he learned that about her? How closely had he been watching to learn something that she had never told him and that she had not known she revealed? "I've been thinking about my father," she said. This was true, which made it a useful deflection. He moved then. She tracked it without appearing to track it, the way she tracked everything, from the counter to a position beside her at the stove. Not crowding her. Close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him from the run, the particular live warmth of a person who has been working hard. and he looked into the pot with a brief, practical attention. "It needs more ginger," he said. She looked at him. "Does it?" "My opinion only. I like more ginger." He paused. "But I'm not the one who's grieving." The word hit her without warning. Grieving, not managing, not processing. Grieving, which was the actual word, the real word, the one she had not allowed herself to use even in the privacy of her own mind, because using it meant admitting that the weight she carried was not a problem to be solved, but a loss to be inhabited. She turned back to the stove. After a moment, she reached for the fresh ginger on the counter and peeled another thumb-length piece and grated it into the pot. "Thank you," she said, very quietly, and she did not specify what she was thanking him for. He did not say anything. He stood beside her for another few minutes, finishing his coffee, and then he left the kitchen. But later, it was the later that undid her a little. She found the table set for two, with the particular care that meant Mrs. Caravella had not done it, but Leo had. Chopsticks on her side, a spoon on his. The window shade angled to let in the January light without the glare. She sat down across from him, and they ate her grandmother's congee together with more ginger in it, and she thought about all the ways she was planning to betray him. And the food tasted like guilt and like something warmer than that simultaneously, and she ate every bite. The second week of January brought a development that changed the timeline. Sorokin called her on the burner and said 3 words. "They're moving faster." She understood. Whoever was cleaning up the evidence connecting Bao to her father's death was accelerating. Documents were disappearing. Witnesses, the kind of witnesses who existed only in the informal records of criminal enterprise, the kind that would never testify in court, but whose knowledge constituted the real truth of events, were going quiet in the particular permanent way that people in this world went quiet. She had a window, and it was closing. She met Sorokin in Flushing for the 4th time, and they sat in the tea-house back room, and she accepted, for the first time, what he was actually offering. Not just information, a plan. A plan in which she would gain access to the one piece of evidence that could confirm or destroy everything. A physical document in the possession of the Miami contractor's former employer, held in a safe deposit box in a bank in Newark, accessible only with a specific combination that Sorokin's people had. The plan required one night, the night of Leo's monthly meeting with the East Coast family heads, when he would be in Manhattan until 2 in the morning at the earliest. The night of the February dark moon, which Sorokin had specified with a poetic fatalism that she found unsettling. "And if the document confirms it's my uncle," she said, "then you'll have your proof," Sorokin said, "and your choices." "And if it confirms it wasn't just my uncle?" She held his gaze. "If it confirms Falcone involvement?" Sorokin looked at her steadily. "Then you'll have proof of that too," he said, "and you'll have my full resources to act on it." She looked at the man across from her, and she thought, "This is not a man who loved my father." This was a man who had valued her father instrumentally, and was now valuing her the same way. And whatever help he gave her was help aimed at his own interests, and she knew this, and she was going to use him anyway, the way he was using her. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like Dante Falcone said the version of events where Leo is the villain is the version that gets you killed. "Tell me about the combination," she said. February in Westchester was a different kind of cold than the city. Not the cold of concrete and glass and wind channeled through canyons of steel, but the cold of open space, of bare trees and frozen ground, of silence so complete on some mornings that she could hear the creak of the oaks shifting in temperatures that hadn't risen above 20 since the new year. She had begun, in spite of everything, to love the house. This complicated things considerably. She loved the library most, which was perhaps not surprising. She loved the specific quality of light in the late afternoon, when the sun came through the south windows and turned everything amber and bronze. She loved the kitchen in the early morning, when Mrs. Caravella was the only other person in it, and she spoke to Uyen in the warm, uncomplicated way of a woman who had decided early that Uyen was good and was proceeding from that assumption. She loved the grounds in snow, which had fallen twice since Christmas, turning the 40 acres into a white and grey study in quietness. She was also, she knew, beginning to love the man who owned all of it. Not in the way she had expected, not in the way the books described, not with certainty or abandon. It was more like the way you came to understand a piece of music you had initially found difficult, slowly, through repeated exposure, noting the structure beneath the surface, recognizing the intelligence and intention in things that had seemed like noise. Leo Falcone was not a simple melody. He was a composition with a counterpoint she was still learning to hear. He had started sometime in January, doing small things. She could not have identified the moment it began, which itself felt significant. A book he had left on her nightstand, not with any note or instruction, just left there. That turned out to be, when she read the first chapter, exactly the kind of book she would have chosen herself, the kind of dense, structural non-fiction about systems and patterns that her father had taught her to love. A modification to the house's weekly schedule that freed up the car and driver on Tuesday afternoons for her use without the security tail, which was the closest thing to independence she had been offered, and which she understood immediately was a deliberate gift of trust. A question, asked one Friday night over dinner, about her mother. Her mother, who had died when Yuin was 4 and existed in her memory only as fragments, a scent, the texture of a particular fabric, a voice heard in the in-between place of half-sleep. Leo had asked about her with the careful, specific attention he gave to everything she told him, and he had not filled the subsequent silence with solutions or reassurances. He had simply sat with her in the fact of it, and something in that sitting with had undone a seam she hadn't known was holding her together. She had cried, very briefly. Not much, just enough. He had not touched her or spoken. He had refilled her water glass and looked at the middle distance with an expression that was, she thought, the way men who do not know how to offer comfort make sure that their presence is still an offering. And it was. It was an offering. She received it. She hated, with a focused ferocity, how deeply she was compromised by caring about this man when she still could not completely rule him out. They had their first real argument on the second Friday of February. It was not about the ports or the investigation or any of the things that actually mattered. It was about a photograph. There had been a journalist, a tabloid journalist, grinding the society crime beat with the particular shameless energy of someone who had made peace with their occupation, who had gotten a shot of her leaving the herbal medicine practitioner's office in Flushing. The shot was innocuous. She was walking out of the building. She was alone. It had been published in a gossip column under the headline, "Falcone's New Bride Goes Solo in Queens." Leo had seen it on Friday morning before he left the city. He arrived Friday evening with the photograph in his hand and an expression that was the controlled surface over something considerably less controlled. "You were without security," he said, setting the photograph on the library table. "I was without your security," she said. "I'm an adult, not a prisoner. You are the wife of the head of the Cosa Nostra in the middle of an investigation that involves people who have already killed one member of your family," he said, with the precision of a man filing a legal document. "This is not about controlling you. This is about keeping you alive." "You're very good at framing control as protection," she said. The temperature in the room dropped. He looked at her with eyes that had gone very still and very cold, in a way she had not seen since the early weeks, since before the congee and the book and the small gifts of trust. "I know the difference," he said quietly, "between controlling someone and protecting them. I have done both in my life, and I understand the distinction better than most people are capable of. What I am doing with you is not control." "Then why am I not being told things that directly concern me?" she said. "Why is the investigation proceeding on your timeline rather than mine? It was my father, my blood. Because knowing things before I can guarantee your safety is more likely to get you killed than not knowing them." The control slipped, just slightly. Not into volume exactly, but into a raw edge of urgency that she had not heard from him before. He checked it immediately, pulled it back, pressed it down. "I'm asking you," he said more quietly. "I am asking you, not ordering, not controlling, to give me 3 more weeks." She looked at him. 3 weeks for what? "To close it," he said. "To have everything I need to give you the full truth with the security to act on it." The full truth. She thought of Sorokin's plan, the dark moon, the bank in Newark, 3 weeks away. "All right," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, searching. "I mean it," he said. 3 weeks. "I heard you," she said. He nodded. He picked up the photograph and folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket and left the library. And she turned back to her book and understood that she had just made 2 simultaneous promises that could not both be kept. That night she heard him in the hallway outside her room at some late hour. Not trying to enter, not pausing, just passing. But she had been awake, lying in the dark, with the familiar architecture of her sleeplessness, and she heard his footsteps stop briefly outside her door, and then continue on. And she understood, with the particular clarity that came in the dark hours when the defences went down, that he stopped outside her door the way you stop outside a door that contains something precious that you are not sure you have the right to. She lay in the dark for a long time after his footsteps had faded. She thought, "I am going to hurt this man." She thought, "I don't know yet if he deserves it." She thought, "I don't know any more if I can." She fell asleep eventually, into dreams she would not remember, and the house breathed around her in the winter dark, and outside the oaks stood in the cold, and the moon was invisible, 3 days from black. The night she chose to move was a Friday. Leo was in the city for his monthly meeting, the one that ran until 2 in the morning at the earliest. The security team was, per their usual Friday protocol, conducting a perimeter check at 9, and then settling into their night positions, with the primary guard on the south gatehouse and a rotating patrol on the east grounds. She had mapped their schedule with 2 months of observation. She knew their timing down to the 3-minute variance. She dressed carefully, dark clothes, flat shoes, the burner phone in her left jacket pocket, the combination she had memorized in her right. The car she had arranged through Sorokin's intermediary, a clean car, not connected to either family, driven by a man who had been paid in cash and would remember nothing, was parked at the junction of 2 back roads, half a mile from the estate's eastern property line, accessible through a gap in the stone wall that a previous owner had broken to access a neighbouring property and that had never been repaired. She had walked it twice in the past week, in daylight, under the cover of her regular afternoon walks. She stood in her room at 9:45 with her hand on the door handle and took exactly 30 seconds to examine what she was doing, with full honesty, the way her father had taught her, to examine every decision before it became irreversible. She was going, alone, to access a document that would tell her the truth about her father's death. If the document confirmed Bao's sole involvement without any Falcone connection, she would have the proof she needed to understand Leo's investigation as genuine, and she would have acted in violation of the trust he had offered her and the promise she had made him, and possibly endangered the case he was building. If the document suggested Falcone involvement, she would know that everything she had begun to feel in this house was built on a foundation of blood and betrayal, and she would have the evidence to destroy him with it. Either way, she was going to know the truth tonight. She opened the door. The drive to Newark took 40 minutes in the clean car with the silent driver. She sat in the back with her hands in her lap and watched the city approach and thought of nothing useful. The bank in Newark was a commercial building that housed 12 private safe deposit vaults, accessible after hours with a combination provided by the vault's administrator, a man whose relationship with Sorokin she had not asked about and did not want to know. The combination worked. She was inside the vault room in 12 minutes. Box 4417. She opened it with the secondary combination. Inside was a single folded document, a contract, not a legal one, not the kind that saw daylight, but the kind that was kept specifically because it could destroy anyone who had signed it. 4 pages, in English and Mandarin. She read it in the vault's fluorescent light with the careful speed of someone accustomed to reading under pressure. Page 1. The agreement between the Miami contractor and his client. Page 2. The specification of the target, her father's name, his schedule, the location, Port Newark, September. Page 3. The payment structure, moving through the shell company, through the Delaware holding company, through the Macau bank. Page 4. The signatures. One signature was a corporate seal she did not recognize. The other signature, handwritten in the precise upright characters of a man who had been educated in both Chinese and Western penmanship, was her uncle's. Bao Din. Bao Din alone. No Falcone name, no Falcone connection anywhere in the document. The holding company, cross-referenced with the shell company structure on page 3, traced entirely through Din family subsidiary accounts, her uncle's, not her father's. The payment had moved through the same channels she had found in her father's miscellaneous folder, the same channels Leo had on his board. She stood in the vault room with the document in her hands, and something cold and absolute settled through her from the crown of her head to the soles of her feet. Her uncle had killed her father. Not Leo, her uncle.
And Leo had known,
Or suspected, or been building the case, and had been protecting her from the knowledge while he worked, and she had... Her phone buzzed. The burner. She looked at it. A message from a number she didn't recognize. 2 words. He knows. She was in the car before she had finished thinking. The driver moved without being told. Sorokin's people were always prepared for the rapid exit. The city moved past the windows in the blur of lights and speed, and she sat with the document in her pocket and her hand pressed flat against her chest over her own heartbeat, and she tried to calculate whether he knows meant Leo knew she had left the house, or Leo knew about Sorokin, or Leo knew about all of it. She was 3 blocks from the Newark bank when another message arrived on her regular phone, her monitored phone, the one connected to the Falcone household security network. It was from Leo. Just 4 words. Where are you? Now. Not a question. Never a question with him. A demand wrapped in a minimal syntax that communicated the full force of what was underneath it. She typed back, "Coming home." He replied immediately, "Don't." She stared at that for a long moment. Don't come home? Then, "There's something here you need to see first. Come to the city. Romulo's. I'll be there in 20. Romulo's was the family restaurant, the one with the private back room where she had been married. She knew it was safe as anything in this world. She told the driver the address. The drive took 11 minutes. She used every one of them to put herself together, the way she had learned to put herself together since she was a child, watching her father walk into rooms where he was the most dangerous person present and look like the calmest one. Breath by breath, detail by detail, until the surface was smooth and the interior was moving like deep water, everything happening, nothing visible. She walked into Romulo's at 11:47. Leo was already there. He was standing at the center table rather than sitting, which told her the situation had not permitted sitting, and he was still in his meeting clothes, the dark suit, white shirt, no tie, and there was something in his stillness that was different from his usual stillness, wound tighter, contained more carefully, the way you contain something that is pressing very hard to get out. He looked at her when she entered. He looked at her the way people look at things they were afraid they might not see again. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He remained standing. "You met with Ivan Sorokin," he said. She held his gaze. "Yes." "Multiple times." "Yes." "Starting in January." His voice was even, almost terrifyingly even. "You used the Tuesday security window I gave you." "Yes." The muscle at the corner of his jaw moved. Once, that was all. "I gave you that window as a gesture of trust," he said. "I know," she said, and the words cost her more than she expected. "Did you understand the risk?" he asked, not angrily, with the particular flatness of someone who has gone past a certain level of controlled feeling into a place where the control costs everything available and there's nothing left over for expression. "Sorokin is connected to the people who ordered your father's—" "I know who ordered my father's death," she said. Silence. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed the document on the table between them. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. Then he sat down. He read it without speaking, his face entirely still, reading the way she read, rapidly, systematically, extracting structure and implication as he went. When he finished, he set it down and was silent for a moment, and she watched him absorb what she already knew. "You have your proof," he said finally. "Yes," she said. "And now you know." He stopped, looked at his hands on the table, then back at her face. "You know I wasn't, that I had no part." "I know," she said. The silence in the room had a particular quality she had not heard before, not tense, not accusatory, something rawer than either, something that was made of all the things they had not said to each other over 4 months of careful navigation, pressing against the surface of the moment like water against glass. "I was going to tell you," he said. 3 weeks. I asked you for 3 weeks. "I know," she said, for the 3rd time. He looked at her, and what she saw in his face was the thing she had been looking for and afraid of in equal measure. The full, uncovered expression of a man who is standing at the boundary of his control with something immense on the other side of it, and is choosing, deliberately, not to retreat behind the wall. "You could have been killed tonight," he said. "If Sorokin's plan had required something different from you, if any variable had been different." He stopped. "I would not have—" Another stop. "I can't." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He went very still under her touch. The way a person goes still when something they have been holding their breath for finally arrives. "I know," she said the 4th time, and this time she meant all of it. He drove her home himself. The security cars followed, but Leo drove, something she had only seen him do twice before, and both times for reasons that turned out to have significance she understood only in retrospect. The drive from Manhattan to Westchester was 45 minutes on empty roads at midnight, and he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gear shift, and she sat in the passenger seat with her jacket still on and the document folded in her pocket, and she watched the dark road unspool ahead of them. "Tell me," she said, after they had been driving for 10 minutes, in a silence that had gradually shifted from complicated to something more navigable. "From the beginning, what you know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he began. He told it in the flat, precise way he told things that mattered, without drama, without editorial, with the clinical honesty of a man who had decided that a story deserved to be told accurately, even when accuracy was painful. He told her that he had been aware of Bao Din for 18 months before Wei Din's death, that his initial intelligence had suggested Bao was running an independent financial operation, moving money through the Din family's commercial accounts in ways that Wei Din wasn't aware of, skimming from the port operations, building a private fund that had no apparent legitimate purpose. He told her that the Russian connection had appeared 8 months before Wei Din's death, that Bao had been meeting with Seveny Most representatives, not Sorokin directly, but his intermediaries, through a series of business meetings in Macau that looked legitimate on the surface and were anything but. That the deal Bao had been brokering was, Leo believed, essentially this. Bao would facilitate Seveny Most's access to the East Coast port operations in exchange for a substantial payment and, critically, for their operational assistance in removing the obstacle to that access, the obstacle being Wei Din. "He sold his brother," Wien said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. "Yes," Leo said. No softening, no buffer. The truth as she had asked for it. "And you were building the case." "I was building the case that would be ironclad enough to destroy him completely. Not just legally. That was never going to be the mechanism. in the way that actually functions in our world. He said our world with a lack of self-consciousness that told her he had stopped performing the separation between his world and hers. But to do it cleanly, without creating a power vacuum in the din operation that would leave you exposed, I needed the complete picture. Every piece, every connection, every individual who could be leveraged. And Sorokin? A pause. Sorokin knew some of what I knew. More, possibly. He had a financial trail I didn't have yet, which is presumably what he gave you. He glanced at her briefly, the dashboard light catching the angle of his face. He's been running his own game. His goal is not your father's justice. His goal is the same as it always was. The ports. I know, she said. Do you trust him? No, she said, but I used him the way he was using me, and I got what I needed. Another brief glance. Something in it that was not quite approval, closer to recognition, the acknowledgement of a peer. The document you have, he said, combined with what I've built, it's enough. It's enough to end this. How? She said. That's for me to manage, he said, and this time I'm asking you to trust me to manage it, because I know exactly what needs to happen, and because... He stopped. His hand on the gear shift was very still. Because the alternative is you in the same room as the man who killed your father before we have the complete security architecture in place. And that is not going to happen, not on any version of this where I have anything to say about it. The ferocity in that last sentence was quiet and absolute, and she turned to look at him fully, his profile in the dark car, the road ahead, the particular quality of his posture that was not exactly tense, but was everything adjacent to it. How long? She said. Days, he said. Not weeks, days. She nodded. Then, Leo. He glanced at her. I'm sorry, she said. For Sorokin, for the window, for using your trust to... Stop, he said. No, I need to... You went looking for the truth about your father's death, he said, using every resource available to you. In a situation where you had good reason to distrust everyone around you, including me. His jaw was tight. I don't blame you for it. I am furious that you were at risk tonight, and I should have told you more, sooner. I was trying to protect you from knowledge, and the protection created its own danger. He was quiet for a moment. That was a failure of judgment on my part. She stared at him. She had never heard Leo Falcone take responsibility for a decision in the specific, unqualified way he just had. Not in 4 months of close observation. Never. That may be the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. I've always been honest with you, he said. You've always been accurate, she said. That's different. A long pause, then, yes, you're right. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that was different from any silence they had shared before, cleared of something, like air after lightning. When they pulled up the driveway under the oaks, the house was lit against the dark in its amber, welcome way, and she sat for a moment after the car stopped, not moving, and felt the 4 months of this strange life she had built here pressing against the present moment like an accumulated weight that was, she was beginning to understand, not entirely uncomfortable. I found something out, she said, before she got out, in the vault tonight. He turned to her. I found out that my father wrote notes in Chinese because he trusted me to read them, she said. He left a trail, specifically for me. He knew, at the end, and he left it for me to find." She pressed her lips together. "I don't know what to do with that yet." Leo looked at her. Then he said, "It means he believed you could handle the truth, and he was right." She got out of the car. She walked into the house. She went to her room, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and she put her face in her hands, not crying exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had no proper name, a release of a pressure that had been building since September, since a parking garage, since 2 bullets. She stayed that way for a long time. Then she washed her face and changed and lay down and found, to her surprise, that she could sleep. The following week was the strangest of the 4 months she had spent in the Westchester house, and also the most real. Something had shifted in the architecture of her life there. Not the physical architecture, not the walls and rooms, but the invisible structure of distance and management that she and Leo had both been maintaining, each for their own reasons, since the wedding. The shift was not a collapse of that structure so much as a mutual decision to stop pretending the distance was greater than it actually was. He started having dinner with her every evening he was in the house, rather than just Fridays. Not grand dinners. Mrs. Caravella left things prepared, and they assembled them, or occasionally he cooked, which she had not known he could do, and which turned out to be a revelation. He cooked with the same focused precision he brought to everything, efficient, technically correct, without flair, but without error. He made a lamb ragout on Tuesday that was simple and exactly right, and she watched him from across the kitchen island while she chopped vegetables and thought about what she was watching. A man who had been entirely alone in a very large house for a very long time. A man for whom domesticity was not a performance, but a practice, conducted without an audience for so long it had become entirely unself-conscious. The way he moved in this kitchen, the location of everything in his hands without looking, the sequence of things, the physical ease of it. This was not a man entertaining. This was a man at home. She wanted to ask him about it, about the aloneness, about whether it had been a choice or simply the consequence of being Leo Falcone in a world that was simultaneously afraid of him and indebted to him, and in which genuine equality was therefore structurally impossible. Instead, she asked him about Rome, which was where his father had been born, and he told her about it with a specific, detailed affection, the particular streets, a trattoria that had been in the same family since the 1940s, the smell of the Tiber in summer. That was the most personal thing she had heard from him in 4 months, not strategic, not managed, just real, offered across a kitchen counter with a glass of wine and the lamb ragout simmering behind him and the January dark pressing against the windows. She told him about Hanoi, her grandmother's kitchen, which was the physical location of half her significant memories, the specific quality of light there in the late afternoon, the sound of motorbikes that she heard sometimes even now in dreams, transported to settings where they had no business being. He listened with the quality of attention that she had learned to recognize as specific to him. Not polite listening, not the listening of a man waiting for his turn to speak, but the full, present, structuring kind of listening, of someone who is building something from what they hear, adding it to an interior architecture of understanding, treating what is being given to them with the seriousness it deserves. She found herself telling him things she had not intended to tell him, about her mother, The fragments she had, and the way they presented themselves sometimes as complete when she knew they were fragments. The way memory collaborated with imagination to construct something coherent from very little material. About the specific nature of her grief for her father, not the dramatic kind, not the kind you showed, but the practical, daily kind that lived in every decision she made, and reminded her that the person who had taught her to make decisions was gone. About the loneliness of being very competent and having the competence mistaken for self-sufficiency. Leo was quiet for a long time after that last one. Then he said with his characteristic precision, "Being capable of managing alone is not the same as wanting to." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He looked at her across the table. The dinner was finished, the wine was low, the lamp on the sideboard threw warm light across his face, and in it he looked, for the first time, fully like a person rather than a position, fully present rather than managed. "I don't want to manage alone," he said. "I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want this to be real." He said it without any of his usual precision, which was how she knew it cost him. Not the arrangement, not the strategy. "I want what's happened here, in this house, between you and me. I want that to be—" "It is real," she said. His eyes came to hers. "It's been real for a while," she said. "I've been angry about it." Something in his face moved, the careful, maintained composure giving way to something younger, something that had been behind the wall for so long it had forgotten what daylight felt like. Not quite a smile. Too serious for a smile. But the temperature of his expression changed in a way that settled into her chest like warmth into cold. "What happens now?" he said. "Now," she said, "you close the investigation. You do what you said you'd do, and I'll be here when it's done." He nodded slowly, a settling, like a decision made. "And then?" he said. She looked at him across the table, at this man who had entered her life as an arranged fact and had become, with the infuriating deliberateness of things that matter, the most significant presence in it. "And then," she said, "we figure out the rest." He moved on Bowdin on a Thursday. She was not told when, she was not told the details. What she was told on Wednesday evening was that it was happening the following day and that she needed to remain in the house with the full security detail in place and that she would hear from him when it was done. She accepted this. She accepted it not with the passive compliance of a woman who had been stripped of agency, but with the deliberate choice of a woman who had examined the situation and determined that Leo's execution of this particular piece was not her domain, and that her insistence on being present would compromise rather than contribute. This distinction between abdication and strategic trust was the thing she was still learning to navigate in the space where her instincts toward total autonomy met the reality of a partnership. Because that was what it was, she knew now. A partnership, unequal in some specific ways that she would spend years adjusting, and equal in the ones that mattered. She spent Thursday in the library. She read and worked and drank too much coffee and watched the snow that had begun falling at noon accumulate on the window ledges in slow, patient inches. Mrs. Caravella came in twice with food she barely touched and a reassuring composure that she had the feeling was itself a form of information. The housekeeper had seen things in this house over 22 years, and her steadiness today was communicating something about the expected outcome. At 6:47 in the evening, Leo called. "It's done," he said. She closed her eyes. The relief was enormous and frightening in its enormity. Not what she had expected, not the clean satisfaction of a closed case, but something more physical than that, something that moved through her body from the inside out, like light through a window that had been blocked. "My uncle?" she asked. "Is alive," Leo said. "He will answer for what he did, not in a court of law, but thoroughly and permanently. The DIN operation will be protected. His access has been removed, his assets frozen, his network informed. He will spend the remainder of his life understanding that every door is closed to him." A pause. "That was my preference. The alternative—" "I know," she said. "The alternative was irreversible." "Yes." She sat with that. Alive. Bao Din was alive. She had expected to feel conflict about that, about the absence of the more permanent kind of justice, but what she actually felt was something closer to relief about that too. She did not want to be a person who required a death to close a grief. Her father would not have wanted that for her. "Leo," she said. "Yes." "Thank you." She pressed her hand flat on the library table. "Not for marrying me, not for the ports, for—" She stopped. "For this. For doing it in a way that— for doing it with care." A pause. His pauses had specific textures, and she had learned them all. This one had the texture of something received, something accepted, something held. "Come home," she said, before she had entirely decided to say it. Another pause. 2 hours, he said. He was there in 90 minutes. She heard the car on the driveway, and she was in the library. Had told herself she would not move from it, would not go to the door like someone waiting. But she found herself in the entry hall, without having made a conscious decision to move. And he came through the door into the warm lamplight of the house, and she watched the snow in his hair and on the shoulders of his coat, and the exhaustion in his face, that was the exhaustion of a man who has spent several hours executing something that cost something. And before either of them said anything, she crossed the space between them and put her arms around him. He went still for exactly one breath. Then his arms came around her, careful first, then complete. The way a man holds something he has been afraid to break. They stood in the entry hall of the house that had been a cage and become a home, while the snow fell outside and the oaks stood in the dark, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt for the first time since September that the ground beneath her feet was solid. He told her everything over the following 2 days, all of it, from the beginning, from the first intelligence report 18 months ago to the last conversation with his contact in Macau this afternoon. He told it in the library, in the kitchen, in the long walks they took through the snow-covered 40 acres in the days after, boots crunching, breath in the cold air, the particular freedom of open space and the particular intimacy of 2 people talking while walking. He told her things he had never told anyone, she thought. Not because they were secrets exactly, but because they were the kind of things a man who lived entirely inside his own controlled mind needed someone outside it in order to articulate. She listened with the focused, structured attention she gave to everything. And she asked questions. And she pushed back where she disagreed. And he let her push back, not with gracious deferment, but with the genuine engagement of someone who valued the push because it tested the structure of his thinking and made it stronger where it was weak. This, she thought, watching his profile on the third day's walk as he talked through the financial architecture of what Bao had built and what would now be dismantled. This was what it could look like. Not the arrangement, not the strategy. This. She also received, over those 2 days, the stories he had not told her before. His father, whom he had loved with the complicated devotion of a son who has been given everything and expected to become it. His mother, who had died when Dante was 12 and Leo was 17, and who had been, by Leo's account, the only person in the world who had ever told him consistently and without condition that the things inside him were worth knowing. The specific loneliness of the seat he had inherited, not the logistical difficulty of it, but the human isolation of being the person everyone deferred to and no one contradicted, and therefore no one was ever entirely honest with. Dante is honest with you, she said. Dante is honest with me because I trained him to be, Leo said, by making it clear from the beginning that I needed it. Most people don't do that, because honesty from subordinates is only worth something if you genuinely act on it. And genuinely acting on it means sometimes admitting you're wrong, which most people in my position find unacceptable. You find it uncomfortable, she said, but not unacceptable. He looked at her. How do you know that? Because you've told me I was right approximately 4 times in the past week, she said, and each time it cost you something, and each time you paid it anyway. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the tree line ahead. Then, you're the second person I've done that for. Your mother, she said. Yes. She put her gloved hand into his coat pocket where his hand was. He turned his hand over and took hers, without looking, the way you take the hand of someone whose presence you have stopped needing to verify. I don't want to be your mother, she said. No, he agreed, with a dryness that surprised a laugh out of her. That would be deeply inconvenient. She was still laughing when he stopped walking and turned toward her, and whatever she saw in his face when he looked at her stopped the laugh in her throat and replaced it with something much quieter and much deeper. I should have told you earlier that He paused. The habit of containment was deeply muscled. She could see him working against it. That you are the person in this house that I come home to. Not the house, not the life. You. I know, she said. I wanted to say it directly, he said, for once. She looked at him in the winter light, among the bare oaks, in the snow of his estate that had been a prison and was now the most familiar ground she had stood on since her father's penthouse. She looked at the face of the most dangerous man she had ever known, and the most careful man she had ever known, and the most honest man she had ever known, in the specific, costly way that honesty required the most from the people who found it hardest. And she thought, this is where you are now. This is the place you've arrived at. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw. He covered it with his. His eyes closed briefly, just briefly, in the way of a man receiving something he had stopped expecting to receive. I know, she said again. Leo, I know. He opened his eyes, he looked at her, then he kissed her, not the careful, managed distance he had maintained for 4 months, not anything cautious at all, but with the full, unguarded honesty of a man who has finally run out of reasons to hold back. And she kissed him back, with 4 months of carefully managed feeling that was finished managing now, thank you, done with management entirely. And the snow fell in the Westchester woods, and the oaks stood their patient watch, and somewhere in the city a chapter was ending. Spring came late to Westchester that year. March moved through the estate in hesitant increments, thaw and then freeze, then thaw again, the ground uncertain beneath the oaks, the first crocuses appearing and then retreating under a late snowfall, then reappearing with the particular stubborn insistence of things that have decided to live. Wien watched it through the south windows in the mornings, and found it a more accurate metaphor for her interior state than she was entirely comfortable with. Things had changed, and were still changing, the way ground changes as the frost comes out of it, slowly, with adjustments and small upheavals, with moments of solid footing and moments when something shifts unexpectedly beneath you, and you catch yourself with a hand on whatever is nearest. What was nearest, increasingly, was Leo. This was both a comfort and a complication, because comfort in that specific form was not something she had anticipated for herself, not here, not with this person, not under these conditions. She had spent her life being entirely self-sufficient in the particular way of people who have been educated to excellence and loved specifically. Her father's love had been enormous and real, and also fiercely conditional on her achievement, which she had understood even as a child and had organized herself around without complaint. The arrangement had produced someone formidably capable and privately starved, in a way she had never had to examine, because the capability had always been enough to keep her occupied. Leo Falcone was the first person since her father who took the capability entirely for granted and wanted to know what was behind it. This was, she was discovering, a very dangerous quality in a person. The meeting with Sorokin happened one last time in mid-March on her terms. She drove herself, with a security detail Leo was no longer trying to hide from her, which was its own kind of evolution, to the tea house in Flushing. And she sat across from Ivan Sorokin in the back room with the familiar tea between them and the familiar quality of managed civility on the table, and she looked at him with the clear eyes of someone who has obtained what she came for and has nothing left to need from this transaction. "The document," Sorokin said. "Has it been used?" "The matter it concerned has been resolved," she said. "Through Falcone." "Through the appropriate channels," she said. "My family's affairs are in order." Sorokin looked at her with his translucent blue eyes. "And the port arrangement?" "Operates under the structure established by the current partnership," she said. "Which is the Falcone Din Corporation, as documented. There is no space in that structure for additional partnership, as I think you know. Your father and I had an arrangement that predated the current structure," he said carefully. "My father is gone," she said. "I'm not my father. I'm his successor, and his successor has different arrangements." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I appreciate what you gave me," she said, and she meant it partially, and she meant it clearly. The information was accurate, and it served its purpose. The debt for that I consider discharged by the risk I took in obtaining the document, which, I'll note, served your interests as much as mine." Sorokin was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him, small and wry and somewhat rueful. "Your father said you were formidable," he said. "He used that word specifically. I understand it now." "Then we understand each other," she said. She left the tea house at noon and did not expect to see Ivan Sorokin again. She was right about that. The Nero nightclub in March was different from October. Brighter somehow, or perhaps she was simply different, moving through it with the ease of someone who had been here enough times that the space had lost its quality of assessment and become simply a place. She was there on a Friday for what had become a monthly standing event, Dante's birthday celebration, which Dante conducted annually with the particular theatrical commitment of someone who treated his own birthday as a civic occasion. She found Dante at the bar on the upper level, already festive, already working his way through a crowd of people who clearly adored him, and he saw her and opened his arms and said, "You look incredible, and also somehow terrifying. How do you do both at once?" And hugged her with the genuine warmth of a man who had decided she was family and was acting accordingly. Leo appeared at her elbow 20 minutes later, a glass of whiskey that he was not drinking in his hand, and looked at the scene around his brother with an expression that mixed affection and exasperation in the exact proportion that she had come to understand as his default mode for Dante. "He's impossible," Leo said. "He's wonderful," she said. "They're the same thing with him." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" She looked at him, at this man, in this nightclub, in this life that she had not chosen, and had been given, and had remade into something she could inhabit. "Yes," she said. He looked at her in the specific way he had been looking at her since the snow, since the library, since the entry hall where she had first walked toward him without deciding to. The way that had no management in it, no wall, nothing between the looking and the intention behind it. "Dance with me," she said. He blinked. I know you can," she said. "I watched you dance at the Montello Christmas party. You're very controlled about it, but you can." That's a pause, the ghost of a smile, real this time, warm. "That's a very specific observation." "I pay attention," she said. "Dance with me." He set down the whiskey glass on the bar with a small, definitive click. "Yes," he said. "All right." They danced, and Dante watched them from across the room with the expression of a man watching something he has been hoping for a long time and is very pleased to finally see. And the music was too loud for conversation, and the lights moved across them in their shifting coloured way, and she thought, "Here, this is where you are. This is what's real." April brought the lawyers and the documents and the long, careful business of putting the formal structure of things in order. The Din family's port operation, stripped of Bao's influence, reorganized with her at the operational helm, required 3 weeks of daily meetings, document reviews, and the particular kind of negotiation that happened not in single high-stakes conversations, but in the accumulation of small decisions made correctly one after another until the pile of correct decisions constituted a direction. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. What was new was doing it in partnership rather than alone. Leo was present at some meetings and absent from others, and the calibration of when he appeared and when he deferred to her was itself a form of communication. He appeared when his weight in the room would be useful, and he stepped back when her authority needed to be primary. This was not deference exactly, and it was not strategy exactly. It was something that operated at the level below both, the level of practical respect for what another person was good at. She noticed it the first time and said nothing. She noticed it the second time and looked at him across the conference table and caught him watching her with an expression that she had learned to read as satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of a man who had gotten what he wanted, but the satisfaction of a man who is watching something work correctly and finds it genuinely pleasing. "You're good," she said in the car afterward. He looked at her. "At knowing when to step back," she said. "Most men with your particular kind of power are incapable of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Most men with my particular kind of power married women who didn't make it worth doing." She turned to look at him. He was watching the road, his profile in the spring afternoon light, and there was something in his expression that was entirely without pretense, just honest, clean, the words meaning exactly what they said. "Leo," she said. "Yes." "I need you to know something." He glanced at her. "When I went to Sorokin," she said, "when I made that plan, the night of the dark moon, it was partly because I didn't fully trust you yet, but it was also partly because I was afraid." She paused, organized the words. "Afraid that if I trusted you completely and was wrong, it would be the kind of wrong that doesn't recover from, the kind that your father experienced." She looked at her hands. "Trusting people has specific costs in my family's history." He was quiet for a long time. The car moved through the spring-green roadway in easy silence. "In mine too," he said finally. "Different kind. Same cost." She nodded. "I know." "I want it to be different," he said. The words cost him. She heard the cost in the careful way they were placed, the way you place something fragile. "With you, I want the trust to go both ways, and I want it to function. Not perfectly, nothing functions perfectly, but functionally, honestly." "It already does," she said, "more than you think." He pulled the car into a side road, not a turn toward home, just a moment, and stopped, turned to look at her. In the spring afternoon light, his grey eyes had a warmth she had not seen in them in October, and not fully seen until recently, a warmth that lived in the light rather than the colour. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to let me say it without—" He stopped. Tried again, the control wavering the way it did now sometimes in specific moments with her, and she had learned to understand those waverings not as weakness, but as their own kind of precision, the precision of a man choosing to feel instead of manage. "I have been—" Another stop, a breath. "Afraid is the right word. For the first time in a very long time, I am afraid of something other than losing power or position or tactical advantage. I am afraid of losing you, specifically, the person, not the arrangement." He looked at her directly, without retreat. "That's new for me. I wanted you to know it." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the spring afternoon continued in its pale gold way, unhurried, indifferent to the fact that something very significant was occurring in a pulled-over car on a side road in Westchester County. Leo, she said. Yes. I love you, she said. Because it was true, and because she was done managing the truth of it, and because her father's daughter did not say things she did not mean, but said, completely, the true things when they were ready to be said. I didn't plan to, and for a while I was furious about it, and now I'm not. I love you. He looked at her in the very specific way that she would remember for the rest of her life, the expression of a man receiving something he had been hungry for so long he had stopped acknowledging the hunger. And then something arrived, and the hunger made itself known with the full force of its accumulation, and the expression was not happiness exactly. It was something older and more complete than happiness, something that had grief in it alongside joy. Because to receive after a long absence is never just receiving. It is also acknowledgement of all the time it was absent. He put his hand against her face, pressed his forehead to hers, closed his eyes. I know, he said quietly, just for her. The echo returned with full weight. I know. I love you too. May in the city had a quality she had forgotten, the relief of warmth, the return of noise, the specific Manhattan energy of a city that had been through winter and was now celebrating survival with the full commitment of a place that understood no spring was guaranteed. She was in the city more now. The Westchester house remained home. She had become attached to it in the way she had never expected, with the full sentimental weight of a person who had found safety in an unlikely place and intended to hold on to it. But the port operation required her presence in the city multiple days a week, and Leo's schedule had always been city-centered, and the compromise was a rhythm that felt increasingly like life in the fully inhabitable sense. She had also begun, quietly, a project she had not told Leo about. Not out of concealment, that particular mode was finished between them, but because she wanted to bring it to him complete, rather than in draft. She was writing, in the meticulous way her father had taught her to write important things, an account of her father's work, his values, his vision for the port operation, and the commercial interests he had built over 40 years. Not a legal document, something more like a memoir, drawn from his files and her memory and the Chinese marginalia that she was working through systematically, translating with the particular care of someone returning to a language that was also a conversation with the dead. She read it to Leo one evening in May, in the library, sitting in their respective chairs with the lamps lit and the spring dark outside the windows. She read for an hour, and he listened, with his eyes closed and his hands still, in the way she had come to understand as his form of fullest attention. When she finished, the library was very quiet. He would have respected you, she said. Not me. You. He was specific about who he respected, and he had complicated feelings about the Falcone family, and he still would have respected you. Leo opened his eyes. How do you know? Because you're honest, she said simply. In the end. That was his standard above everything else. He could work with dangerous people, he said. He could negotiate with ruthless people. He could even like them. But dishonesty was the one thing he found unworkable. She looked at her hands. He thought Bao was honest. He was wrong about that. Leo was quiet for a moment. The people we trust most are the ones who have learned most precisely what form of dishonesty we're least likely to catch, he said. She looked at him. That's a bleak observation. It's an accurate one. A pause. Which is why the only workable solution is to build something in which neither person has an interest in dishonesty. Mutually assured transparency, she said, something like that. The corner of his mouth moved, less militaristic in practice, I'd hope. She set the manuscript down and looked at him across the library, at this man who was her husband and her partner and her home, in the most interior meaning of that word, the meaning that had nothing to do with architecture or addresses. "Leo," she said, "I want to tell you something." He looked at her. "Another true thing," he said, reading her tone. "Another true thing," she confirmed. She pressed her hands together. "I'm happy," she said. "Not every minute, not without complication, but genuinely, structurally, fundamentally happy. And I wanted to say that because—" She stopped. "Because my father believed happiness was a kind of courage, that you had to be brave to let yourself be happy in this world, and that the people who couldn't be brave enough for it were the saddest people he knew. And I want to be brave enough for it." Leo stood. He crossed the library in 3 steps, and he picked up her manuscript and set it carefully aside and took her hands in both of his and looked at her with the full, unmanaged, unmediated expression she had come to love, had loved since it first appeared, and she had refused to name it. "Be brave enough for it," he said. "I'm right here." She stood. They stood together in the library in the May evening, hands clasped, and outside the oaks were in full leaf now, and the 40 acres were green and alive with it, and the house breathed around them in its old, patient way. Nero, on a Friday in late May, was full. She stood at the upper railing with a glass of sparkling water and looked down at the dance floor with the particular pleasure of someone who has earned their relationship with a place, and Dante appeared beside her with the champagne glass he was never without at his own club, and the particular quality of cheerful intensity he brought to everything. "You look like a woman who has figured something out," he said. "I have figured several things out," she said. "The most important one?" She considered. "That trust isn't the absence of risk," she said. "It's the decision that the person is worth the risk." Dante looked at her for a long moment, with his brother's eyes and his own warmth, and the specific expression of a man who loves his brother very much and is seeing his brother loved in return. "Dad would have liked you," he said. "He was terrible, but he had taste." She laughed. "High praise." "It is, from me." He clinked his glass against her water. "Welcome to the family. I mean it properly this time." Below them, the music moved through the club like weather, like the particular rhythm of a city that does not stop. She looked down at the dance floor, at the hundreds of people moving in the coloured light, and she thought of her father and his Chinese marginalia, and his belief in courage as a prerequisite for happiness. And she thought of Leo somewhere in this building, in the private office on the 3rd floor, where the actual business of things was always being conducted, regardless of what was happening on the floors below. And she felt the warm, specific reality of her life, as it currently existed, settle around her like something physical and solid and hers. She finished her water. She set the glass down. "I'm going to find my husband," she said. "Tell him I'll need him back in 24—" Dante began. "Absolutely not," she said pleasantly, and left him grinning. Summer. The estate in Westchester in summer was a different creature from the winter house she had first known. the oaks in full green canopy, the 40 acres lush and operational with the particular living weight of July. She had begun, in June, working with the groundskeeper to restore a section of the east garden that had been left untended for several years. And she spent mornings there with the particular pleasure of physical, uncomplicated work, the kind that did not require calculation, that asked only for presence and patience, and gave back, in return, the visible evidence of effort. Leo had found her there on a Tuesday morning in July, in working clothes, her hair up, entirely unglamorous, covered in soil to the elbows. He had stood at the garden's edge and looked at her with an expression she recognized now without effort, the warm, specific, entirely unguarded look that was his equivalent of a declaration. "You're going to kill the roses if you cut there," he said. She looked at where she was cutting. "I know what I'm doing." He came into the garden anyway and crouched beside her and showed her, with his large and careful hands, the correct place to make the cut. She watched his hands rather than the rose. "How do you know this?" she asked. "My mother gardened," he said. "I helped." He made the cut and stood and looked at the rosebush with a brief, private expression that she understood was the expression he wore when touching the parts of his life that had been good and were over. She said it was the only honest work that paid in beauty instead of money. "She sounds extraordinary," Wynne said. "She was," Leo said simply. She stood up. She was at his shoulder height, which she had become accustomed to, had become in fact quite fond of, the specific physical reality of being with someone whose physical reality was so different from her own, and so entirely, practically comfortable. She reached up and removed a leaf from his hair that had fallen from an oak branch above them. He caught her hand as she lowered it, held it, looked at her with the full, warm, uncomplicated expression of a man who has nothing left to manage. "I have something to tell you," he said. She studied him. "Good or complicated?" "Both," he said. "Dante is getting married." She blinked. Then she laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh that she did not try to manage. "To whom?" "Lucia Bertoli, Providence, the family you met at Christmas." "The one who spent 20 minutes arguing with him about jazz," she said, because she catalogued everything. "The same." Leo's mouth curved, warm. "He called me this morning. He sounded—" He paused, searching for the word with the seriousness he brought to accurate description. "Terrified," he said, "in the good way. The way I was terrified." She looked at him. "The way you were terrified," she repeated. "When I understood that what was happening between you and me was real," he said, with the precise, undeflected honesty that was his gift and his practice, and that real things can be lost in ways that theoretical things cannot. She squeezed his hand. "He'll be all right," she said. "He's been practicing on your relationship with me." Leo blinked. Then he laughed. And she stood in the July garden and received the gift of Leo Falcone laughing, which was something she was still, 4 months in, not entirely over. The way you are never entirely over certain, specific gifts. There was a dinner that July, a family dinner, the Broad family, 20 people at the Long Island estate, that marked something she recognized as significant without being able to articulate precisely what it marked until later. It was not a formal occasion. It was what it said on the surface: dinner, family, the particular warmth and chaos and carefully managed warmth of a large Italian-American family gathering in summer, tables moved outside, the garden's string lights from Christmas repurposed for the season, Dante in charge of the music, and therefore responsible for an evening that oscillated between Sinatra and something contemporary that the older family members regarded with the suspicion due any era they had not grown up in. She sat between Leo and Dante's almost fiancée, Lucia, who turned out to be quick-witted and warm and not at all intimidated by either of them, which Wynne immediately respected. And she ate and talked and laughed and participated in the natural, unconstructed way of someone for whom the table is genuinely home. At some point in the evening she looked up and found Leo watching her from 3 people away across the outdoor table, in the particular way that had become their private language. The look that said, "I see you, specifically, in this room, in this life, in all the life that will come after this." She looked back. Around them the family moved in the warm summer dark. Dante refilling wine, Mrs. Caravella emerging from the kitchen with another dish, the younger generation of Falcone cousins conducting the particular organized chaos of youth at an outdoor table, and the lights in the garden moved in the slight summer wind, and the sound was audible, if you listened for it, a distant, continuous breath. She had not planned this life. She had not chosen it in the clean way of an uncomplicated decision. She had arrived at it through grief and arrangement and force of circumstance, and the particular alchemy of 2 people whose precision, applied to each other, had produced something neither of them had expected or could entirely account for. She looked across the table at her husband. He raised his glass, a small gesture, private in a public room, offered to her across the people and the food and the noise and the summer dark. She raised hers. They did not need to say anything. They had learned each other's language well enough to read the untranscribed version fluently. Here, this, ours. There was a conversation late in August. It happened on the stone terrace at the back of the Westchester house, on an evening that was almost the specific, perfect temperature, warm enough for shirt sleeves, cool enough for the idea of autumn, the particular August evening that arrives like a preview of something coming and makes you grateful for what is still present. The sun had gone down an hour ago, and the sky was that specific deep blue that precedes full dark, and the first stars were visible over the oaks. Leo was beside her with scotch he was actually drinking. She had noticed gradually that he drank more freely now, with less management, one of many small indicators of a shift in the underlying state of things. She had green tea, and her feet were bare on the warm stone, and she was thinking about nothing in particular, which was a mode she had accessed approximately twice in her life before this year, and was now accessing with increasing frequency. "Bow," she said. Not preamble, just the name, which was all the preamble needed. Leo turned to look at her. "I need to know," she said. "Not what happened to him. I know what happened to him." A pause. "I need to know if I feel, if I need to feel." She organized it. "Whether what was done on my behalf satisfies something I need satisfied, or whether I carry the remainder of this for the rest of my life." Leo was quiet for a long moment. "What does it feel like?" he asked. Not a deflection, a genuine question asked with the seriousness of a man for whom feeling was data to be processed rather than dismissed. She considered. "Like a chapter that is over," she said slowly, "not cleanly resolved, not all the edges filed smooth, but over, in the way that things in this world are over, not healed, not erased, but contained, managed." She paused. Is that enough? To have it contained rather than erased? Yes, Leo said simply. That is, in my experience, the only ending available. He turned his glass slowly. The people who wait for erasure wait forever. The people who learn to live within the management of it. He paused. They get to have everything else. She considered that. My father would call it pragmatism. It is pragmatism, Leo said, but pragmatism in the service of living, rather than in the service of avoidance. That's a distinction worth making. She looked at the dark sky above the oaks, the stars more numerous now, the blue deepening to black at the edges. I miss him every day, she said. I know, Leo said. I don't think that changes. I know, he said again, with the authority of a man who has missed his own people for years and has learned the topography of that particular landscape. She leaned into him, not dramatically, not with the specific intention of comfort, so much as with the simple, practical ease of a person who is where they belong, leaning toward the thing they belong to. His arm came around her with the same ease, automatic, unthinking, the way things are when they have become habit, not lesser for being habit, only more true. Leo, she said. Yes. Do you think my father knew about you, about this, the shape of what would happen? He was quiet. She waited. I think your father was a man who arranged his affairs with care, Leo said eventually, including the affairs he could not directly control. The miscellaneous folder, the Chinese marginalia, the trail he left. A pause. I think he trusted you to find what needed to be found. And I think, this is my opinion, I can't know, that he had looked at the situation with the Falcone family and concluded that the solution, if there was one, would require you to be somewhere inside it. She absorbed this. He arranged the marriage, she said. Not specifically, Leo said, but he may have left the door unlocked in a way. She thought about this for a long time in the warm August dark, leaning against her husband on the stone terrace of the house that had been her cage and was her home. He had good taste, she said finally. She felt rather than heard Leo's laugh, a low, quiet sound in his chest, warm against her temple where she had settled against him. He had excellent taste, Leo said. I'll grant him that. In September, 1 year exactly from her father's death, she went back to the parking garage in Port Newark, alone. She had not told Leo she was going. She had told him she needed a day, and he had looked at her with the understanding of a man who knows the things his wife needs without requiring them to be explained. And he had kissed her forehead and said, "Call me when you're ready to come home." And she had driven herself in a car without a tail, something she had insisted on and he had, with visible effort, allowed. She stood in the parking garage at the level where it had happened, and she stood there for a long time. She said some things, quietly, in the Chinese she had grown up hearing in her grandmother's kitchen and her father's private moments. She said what she had to say about grief and justice and the particular love between a father and a daughter that is also, when it is specific and real, a transaction of trust. He had trusted her with his truth, even at the end, and she had found it and carried it home. She said what she had to say about choices, hers, his. The fact that she had made, in this year, choices that might have gone differently and were glad they hadn't. She said goodbye, or something adjacent to goodbye, which is never quite possible, but which was close enough. She drove home. The oaks met her at the top of the long driveway, full with September, deep green going slowly to gold. The house sat in its old stone certainty at the end of the drive, lamps already lit inside against the late afternoon, the warm amber light visible from the driveway. Leo was at the door when she pulled up, not waiting exactly, just there. She got out of the car. He looked at her face and understood, without asking, everything that needed to be understood. "Hungry?" he said. She took a breath. "Yes," she said. She walked inside. The new year arrived with the particular clarity of a year that has earned its beginning. January in Westchester. The bare oaks, the cold light, the specific quality of a house that has learned to contain the people inside it rather than merely hold them. She sat at the kitchen island on the first morning of the new year with green tea and her laptop and the particular productive satisfaction of someone who has work that matters and the time and resources to do it well. The port operation was, 18 months after her father's death, in better shape than it had been in 5 years. She had not achieved this by reproducing her father's methods. She had studied them, honoured them, and then deliberately built the next iteration. More transparent in its legitimate structures, more rigorous in its documentation, and more strategically aware in its engagement with the evolving commercial landscape of the East Coast. The Falcone partnership had proven not merely contractually beneficial, but operationally sound. Leo's network and hers overlapped in ways that created genuine efficiencies rather than mere consolidation, which was the outcome you got when two people who were each actually good at things built something together. There had also been, in the 14 months since the resolution of Bao's case, a conversation with Gerald Chu and 2 senior attorneys about a formal foundation in Wei Din's name. The foundation was not yet active. She was building it carefully, in the way her father had built everything he cared about. But its purpose was taking shape. Supporting port communities, funding education for the children of maritime workers, investing in the sustainable infrastructure that the next generation of shipping would require. Her father had believed the ports were not merely economic mechanisms, but communities, with all the obligations that communities entailed. She intended to honour that belief. Leo came into the kitchen at 8 with the particular morning-focused energy she had long since mapped. Coffee first, then whatever was in front of him, then gradually available as the day organised itself. She handed him his coffee without being asked. One of those 1,000 small, specific accommodations that accumulated over months into something that functioned like a language. He stood at the counter and looked at her working and said, "What are you drafting?" "Foundation board charter," she said. "Governance structure." He read over her shoulder for a moment. "This clause will conflict with the non-profit filing requirements in New York," he said, pointing to paragraph 4. "I know. I'm rewriting it." She paused. "Do you want to sit down, or are you going to hover?" "Hovering is efficient," he said. "It's also deeply annoying." He pulled out the stool across from her and sat down. He had a legal pad, and he pulled it toward him and began working through what she was drafted as a co-reviewer, without being asked, with the focused precision of a man who does not look at a document without engaging with it fully. She watched him for a moment, this man across her kitchen island at 8 in the morning in January, who had entered her life as a threat and a constraint, and had become, through the particular alchemy of two very stubborn and very honest people being forced into close proximity, something that she understood now was the specific shape of her life. Not because he had designed her life, not because he had arranged her happiness, but because he was, in the truest sense, a match for her. Not in the diminutive, decorative sense of a perfect fit, but in the serious sense of two things that were each capable of considerable force and had learned to apply that force in the same direction. "This is good work," he said, not looking up from the charter. "Your father would recognize the architecture." "He taught it to me," she said. Leo nodded, still reading. Then, "I want to put the family foundation in partnership with it, formally, not just funding, structural partnership. The Falcone family has port community relationships going back 40 years that would complement this." She looked at him. He was still reading the charter, making notes in the margin with the focused efficiency of a man who had already decided and was now executing. But he glanced up briefly when she didn't respond. "It's your father's legacy," he said. "I'm not trying to take precedence over that. I'm suggesting we build something larger than either family could build alone." A pause. "If you agree." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "I agree." He went back to the charter. She went back to her laptop. The kitchen was warm, and the January morning pressed its pale light against the windows, and somewhere in the 40 acres the bare oaks stood in the cold and waited for their season to come back around. There was a night in February, the 2nd February, the year's second, the dark moon once again approaching in the calendar, when she woke at 2 in the morning from a dream that did not resolve into memory on waking, but left a residue of something vivid and moved. She lay in the dark for a moment. Leo was asleep beside her, deeply, with the specific thoroughness of a man who, when he finally allowed himself to rest, rested completely. She listened to his breathing, and the house breathing around them, and the wind outside in the oaks. She thought about the night 1 year ago when she had gone to Newark with a document and a plan, and a heart full of everything unresolved. She thought about Sorokin's message. He knows. She thought about walking into Romulo's and seeing Leo standing at the centre table, not sitting, standing, unable to sit because she had been in danger and he had known it, and whatever she had thought she knew about him had not prepared her for what his face looked like when he was afraid of losing her. She thought about what it had cost him, those 4 months of patience, of waiting, of building the case brick by brick, while managing the fear that she would act before he was ready, that she would put herself in the path of something he could not stop, that the truth would arrive too late or in the wrong shape, or without the protection he was trying to build around it. She had been angry at the protection. She had experienced it as control. She understood now, not forgivingly. She was not a person who forgave through understanding. She was a person who understood through accumulation of evidence. She understood now that the line between the two was drawn not in the action, but in the intention, and that his intention, from the beginning, had been the thing Dante had told her it was. The version of events where Leo is the villain is the version that gets you killed. Dante had been right. She was glad she hadn't listened to him immediately. The path she had taken, the Sorokin path, the Newark night, the vault and the document and the drive to Romulo's, had produced something that would not have been produced any other way. The certain knowledge, built by her own hands, of the truth. Not presented to her, found. The difference mattered. It would always matter. She had needed to find it herself because she was Wei Din's daughter, and Wei Din's daughter trusted what she could verify. She had verified it, and she had come home. Leo woke as she was thinking, the particular way he woke, complete and immediate, from deep sleep to full presence in a single transition, which was the sleep of a man who had learned young that the space between asleep and awake could be used against you. "You're awake," he said, not a question. "I was thinking," she said. A pause. Good thoughts or working thoughts? Both. She turned toward him in the dark. "Leo." "Yes?" "I want to tell you something." She felt him still beside her in the particular way that meant full attention. "Yes," he said. "I don't regret any of it," she said. "The contract, the marriage, the cage that turned into this." She gestured, which was absurd in the dark, but he understood it. "Even the parts that were hard, even Sorokin and the vault and the night I was going to—" She stopped. "Even all of that. Because it led here, and here is where I want to be." In the dark, his hand found hers. "I know," he said. He said it the way she had said it to him on the worst night, with the full weight of the thing it was containing, with everything behind it. She moved closer. He pulled her in. Outside, the February dark and the bare oaks and the cold and the nearly absent moon. 3 days from new, barely visible, the dark moon almost arrived and already in its process of return. "Leo," she said, her face against his shoulder. "Yes." "The contract," she said, "the original one, the arrangement." "Yes." "I want to rewrite it," she said. "Not legally. The legal one is fine. I mean—" She pressed her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm, steady and specific, and his. "I want the real terms, the ones that are actually operative." He was quiet for a moment. She felt him considering. The particular quality of his silence when he was choosing words with care. "The real terms," he said, "are that I will spend the rest of my life being honest with you, even when honesty costs something, and being present in the way you need me to be present, and learning what that looks like, because it is not always the same, and I am not always correct in my reading, but I will always try." Another pause, and in the pause she heard the care he was taking. "And that when I am wrong, I will say so, because you have shown me what it looks like to receive that, and I understand now that it's possible, and that it does not diminish anything worth keeping." She pressed her lips together. "Those are good terms," she said. "Your terms," he said. "Add them." She thought. "My terms are that I will trust you with the truth of what I think and what I feel and what I need, because I have learned that you are a person who can be trusted with those things, and that trusting you with them is not weakness, it is the opposite of weakness." She paused. "And that when I'm afraid, instead of acting alone, I will tell you first. I'm not promising I'll always wait for you to solve it. I will never be that person, and you knew that when you married me. Wouldn't want you to be," he said. But I will tell you, she said, first, before Sorokin or anyone else. Yes, he said, that's all I needed. She lay in the dark and felt the house around her, old and patient and entirely known now. Every room, every sound, every particular quality of light at every hour. She felt the February dark and the approaching moon return, and the oaks in their bare winter patience that she knew now preceded abundance. She felt Leo, breathing steadily, holding her with the uncalculated ease of a man who has decided where he is and intends to remain. Leo, she said. Yes, he said, for what was perhaps the 1000th time, with the same patience as the first. I'm home, she said. He pressed his lips to her hair. Yes, he said, you are. Outside the window, the Westchester dark held its cold, ancient breath. The oaks stood their patient watch over the 40 acres that had been a cage and a battlefield and a home. And the February wind moved through them with the particular sound that she had come to love, not despite its wildness, but because of it. Because wildness was not the opposite of safety, she had learned. Wildness was simply the thing that lived outside the place you had made safe. And the place you had made safe was all the more real for the contrast. Inside the house, the lamps had been turned off hours ago. In the kitchen, the morning's preparations sat waiting for the morning. In the library, the accumulated evidence of her father's life was being translated, page by careful page, into something that would outlast all of them. In the bedroom on the 2nd floor, 2 people lay in the dark and breathed and held and said, without words, everything that needed saying, the full, specific, irreducible thing that was theirs, built from the materials of grief and necessity and the particular alchemy of 2 people who were each too honest for pretense and too precise for sentiment, and who had found in each other the only mirror that told the truth completely. The dark moon turned in its orbit, invisible and present, already in its slow return toward light. Everything that had burned had left what always remains, the real thing, the essential thing, the thing that could not be taken by violence or arrangement or the long patience of men who moved the world by other people's grief. Love. Fierce and practical and honest, the only contract worth writing, the only one neither of them would ever break. March. The oaks in the first green of the season. A letter on the library desk, in Chinese, addressed in her father's handwriting. The last letter, found in the final box of his documents, which she had saved for the right moment without knowing she was saving it. She read it on a Tuesday afternoon with Leo beside her, though he could not read the Chinese, and she had not yet translated it. He sat with her while she read, which was the thing he did best. The letter said, "My daughter, if you are reading this, it means you found everything I left for you to find, and you are somewhere safe, and you have done what I raised you to do, told the truth, and survived the telling of it. I have one thing to ask of you. Be happy, not as a consolation for what was lost, as an act of the same courage I taught you for everything else. Be happy with full force, the way you do everything, because the people who destroy happiness are only defeated by the people who refuse to stop having it. You have always known who you are. Trust what you know. With all the love I know how to offer, your father. She folded the letter carefully and set it on the desk. Leo's hand covered hers.
"What does it say?" he asked.
She looked at him, at his grey eyes and his careful face, and the specific, warm expression that was his now and hers to receive. "He says to be happy," she said. Leo looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That we can do." She believed him. Outside, the oaks were flowering in the first green of the season, and the 40 acres were alive with the returning warmth, and the house breathed around them in its old, patient way, and the world continued in all its dangerous beauty, and they were in it together, which was, in the end, the only contract that mattered, the only one that needed no lawyers, the only one written in the only ink that lasts.